One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. Okay, Jeff, so you made a decision and an announcement that went public yesterday, Tuesday, that you have hired co-head coaches for baseball. Colin Kaline, obviously a name that many people would recognize. Detroit Tigers legendary Al Kaline, of course, connection. And then Jack Healy, who had been with you, are going to be your new co-head coaches for baseball moving forward. The obvious place to start here, Jeff, is how did you come to this decision and why is it the best arrangement for baseball moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the one thing is there's a lot of factors that played into it that made this an ideal situation. It seems non-traditional at first, but as I kind of walk through the decision-making process, I think it'll make more sense. I don't think you could do co-head coaches with two 50-year-olds or two 40-year-olds or even two experienced 30-year-olds. But the candidacy of both Jackie and Colin coming to the table was very similar, having Major League Baseball, minor league experience, have been through that process, basically gone through the recruiting, has some significant wins in terms of the recruiting, in terms of the X's and O's, being assistant coaches and improving their worth through that. And then I'll tell you, both of them just blew us away in terms of their preparedness, organization through the interview process. They were head and shoulders above our candidate pool in terms of what they brought to the table. So as we analyzed it, and we do a lot of analysis internally with respect to millennials and the generation of student athletes and prospects that are coming to us, from that standpoint, hiring two younger 20-somethings that have significant experience, we truly felt that two heads were better than one in this case, and that the sum of their parts would overvalue a traditional hire. And I think we have some latitude with our culture and that we trying to be out of the box and innovative. And again, this was just a product in terms of us believing that the core characteristics of these two individuals matched up so well and meshed so well that we truly believe that their interplay and their collaboration, which is unique to this generation, is going to allow our baseball program to experience a level of success that we haven't had for 19 years. That was our last winning record, was 19 years ago.
So you're the second AD, Jeff, in the last week who I've heard or read refer directly to this paradigm of communicating with millennials, and which are student athletes these days. Of course, Furman's athletic director, Mike Buddy, said the same thing about his baseball hire either earlier this week or late last. Drill down on that a little bit. What is the advantage of a 20-year-old, somebody who's closer to this generation than the 50-year-olds you mentioned earlier? What is it about that type of communication style and that lifestyle that could be beneficial?
Sure. First of all, I think we have a lot of older coaches on our staff that do a great job, and there are a lot of 40 and 50 and 60 and 70-year-olds that have been hired in the last decade that have done great work. But in particular to this hire and this opportunity, we truly felt that we wanted to get in tune to our student-athlete experience. And that's the core of our decision-making within our culture, is to what is most advantageous to the student-athlete experience. We truly felt that we needed to bring in a coach, or in this case coaches, that could relate to what the objectives would be from a student-athlete experience standpoint. And therefore, they've grown up and assimilated themselves into the same kind of dynamic that our prospects and our current roster student athletes have in terms of their development and what they hold dear and what they value in terms of their relationships and what they value in terms of their authenticity and what they value in terms of wanting to be part of the process. This is a culture that really doesn't want to be told no. This is a culture that really doesn't want to have any negative coaching. And two individuals that can relate to that, but at the same time have significant experience in their own right, that they can draw on each other and their relative experiences in terms of forming their own culture with respect to this generation, was something that was, I think, truly value added through our process.
Do you see these two guys as mutually inclusive of each other and the performance of the program going forward? For instance, how do you respond to the situation if 4 years from now the program's turned, you make an NCAA tournament or two, and one guy goes to get a new head job or doesn't? I mean, how does this play out? It's so unique, and co-head coaches are not. It's not the first time, of course. There's other places where it's happened in volleyball and softball come to mind initially, and sometimes it's been a male and a female overseeing a sport who are married,
Right.
and sometimes it's not.
Right.
It's not totally novel, but it's pretty unique. So how have you framework this for the future?
Well, I think at the early part of it, I think they're going to be evaluated together jointly. I think they both have had conversations, and again, we didn't go into this thinking this was going to be the end result. This was an organic decision that came based off the skill sets and the conversations and the interview process, where as we identified and looked at what was in the best interest of our baseball program moving forward. At this time, this was the right decision. I can't speak if it should be replicated nationally or regionally, or if in other similarly situated institutions that have different cultures or different expectations with respect to their programs, they would come to the same conclusions that we did. But saying that, I think the evaluation process for both co-head coaches, at least initially, is going to be linked up. But that's something that they're looking forward to in terms of this collaboration piece. Again, this generation wants to collaborate. They want to talk things out. And this kind of forces that at inception. Now, what happens a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, as we have hopefully modicums of success and they grow into their respective roles, I think that's open right now, and I don't think we have any preconceived notions in terms of a succession planning or anything like that. I think this developed organically, and I think moving into the future, I think we are going to let it develop organically as well, and then we'll take our cues based off of their development and the development of our baseball program.
Did you and your team call administrators at schools that have had this arrangement before and try to understand maybe the best way to administrate it?
We had internal discussions, and we reached out a little bit to have some dialogue with respect to this. But again, it's so unique that there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of information that's out there to suggest that this would be a preferred outcome as you initially go into a process. But that said, going through the process, it makes the most amount of sense. And the one thing that I stand by on my record is my ability to identify head coaches through my stop at Bakersfield and at Oakland as a D1. I'm about culture fit, and I think that fit overrides sometimes the resume or experiences, because if in this case, two persons or one person in a traditional hire fit your culture and you identify that person to be the best candidate in terms of that attribute, overwhelmingly, I've found that you're going to be successful in terms of the hiring process. And in this case, they both were the right fit for the program, but because they have such a similar career arc in terms of their age and their experiences, it just made sense that we could mesh those two together and then forge this relationship that they're both looking forward to, by the way, but forge it in a way that we think we're going to get a huge win in terms of our culture fit and accentuate the positives from what they bring to the table.
I want to come back to fit, and I want to dig in on fit just a little more, not just with this decision, but your entire department. But
sure.
In baseball's case here, which of the two did you present the idea to first, and how long was their pause before they responded to you?
That's a very interesting question. Well, Colin was the first one we broached the subject with, and the initial response was, "That's a great idea." And that at that point, he had never met Jackie. And then inversely, when we thought we had some momentum from Colin in terms of how he evaluated the opportunity, we then approached Jackie and said, "Hey, what do you think about this as a possible solution?" "That's a great idea." So they both, eyes wide open, had the same intuitive and internal reaction. And that just further supplanted in our minds that this was something that could work based off of their characteristics they brought to the table. Again, from an organizational preparedness level, through the interview process, these two were far and away the most organized and prepared in terms of how they presented their vision for Oakland baseball. And it was of such alignment, the two visions, that we knew there would be a fit there.
What will bringing an individual with the last name of K-Line and his baseball pedigree that Colin has, what will that do in the area for the for your brand and for recruiting?
Well, I'm not sure about recruiting. I'm not really sure about the brand equity on its surface. You know, to be fair to Colin, we evaluated his candidacy pretty much with it's a blind resume, and his preparedness through the interview process and how he presented himself on campus was remarkable, whether his last name was Johnson or Smith or K-Line in this case. Now, having said that, I mean, just who his grandfather is in the area and his connections to the community in Detroit and his connections with the Detroit Tigers certainly could add and be an advantageous situation to us moving forward. But this decision wasn't made with that in mind. This decision was made in terms of what is the best fit of our head coach coming into Oakland baseball.
So in your background, Jeff, of hiring head coaches and looking through the lens primarily of fit, and of course
Right.
Fit means different things to different people at different schools. How do you actually analyze when you don't get one right? How do you go back and score yourself on what you may have missed in that hire? I'm always interested in, and I'm curious to hear leaders talk about how they think about why they missed on a head coach. Do you have any process, whether, I doubt it's official by any stretch, but do you
Sure.
have a mental framework that you work through on the ones you've missed and go, oh, I didn't see this during the interview process or in the analysis, and that allows you to kind of continue to evolve your own decision-making patterns when you do go make a future hire?
Well, it's interesting. I just had this discussion as a learning opportunity with our entire staff as we walked through our, in that case, men's golf search and what the hiring process in intercollegiate athletics could look like, and what, in terms of my experience, is what I think it should look like. And early on in the process, we put an objective lens through the criteria. You know, we determined the education, the experiences, the collegiate experience, athletics, whatever that we hold dear or think are going to be non-controversial attributes that we want out of our pool. And then we apply that criteria on its face through the entire candidate pool. And we don't try to instill subjective criteria like they're not going to come because of geography, they're not going to come because of money, they're not from Michigan in this case, or any other kind of criteria where we would be putting a value judgment on it. So once you bring it through that lens and you get to your key criteria, I instruct those that are doing our hiring. In this case, Patrick McNeil, our senior associate athletic director, was the lead person in terms of narrowing the field to the final pool. What are 2 or 3 critical questions that are going to, once you have this pool, indicate that they are of the quality to bring to campus for the final selection? And so we have 2 or 3, and we kind of say this is the ideal answer of what we're looking for. And a candidate at Oakland University for one of our head coaching positions in this case, in terms of our fit, would analyze and would have an intuitive answer that would be along these lines. And then once we get through that process, we say, okay, now we have 3, 4, 5 candidates that are evaluated, and they come to campus, and then when they walk in, and this is the first time I generally meet the candidates, when they walk into my door, I have my own criteria in terms of the questions that I ask that are very unique. And my framework for asking these questions is to try to get to an authentic answer. I'm trying to get away from, as candidates come in with a scripted answer or a general answer, I want an authentic answer so I can understand how people are going to react in certain situations, get to the core of what they can bring to the table in terms of leading student athletes, and if they're going to be fit to our culture. And that, I think, having gone through it, that's why I think I've been really successful in terms of the head coach hiring process, is that there is this, I don't quite want to call it a science, but there is just a forethought that you need to put into the process as to what expectations you want at various points of that selection cycle.
Cutting through to get to an authentic answer could be like a half an hour conversation in and of itself.
Sure.
I mean, truly. But do you have strategies, or is it certain questions you ask to try to get around the canned answer?
Sure. I mean, I ask some general questions at the beginning, but then I'll drill deeper into more specific or questions that I don't think that the candidate is prepared for. I basically say, why Oakland, why this time? I think that's very general across the board. But even that answer in and of itself will indicate to me a level of preparedness in terms of have they done the research? Do they understand what our culture is? How are they going through the process of analyzing why this might be a fit in their own minds? And some people answer it generically, and some people answer it emotionally, and some people answer it specifically. And from there, I can take the cue and kind of drill down into, some specific questions relative to, okay, here's a case study. How would you handle this situation? And those are the ones that are most revealing to me, is when you have a case study that involves a student-athlete experience equation, or is going to have them do a value proposition on how they're going to lead moving forward when it's not a clear answer and they can't script the answer.
Okay, so let's go back to closing that loop. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot on anybody
Sure.
you missed on. I'm truly curious about when you do miss, how do you analyze that situation to help you going forward?
Sure. Well, if you miss, and I'm looking back on my career, I mean, I think it might be a little bit of I would read in a little bit to the answers, or you sometimes you bring your own personal bias into decisions, and so you may, or even myself, or any being a human being, you may have perceptions walking in the door that you can't quite get to a completely objective standard. But you really want to go in with a truly blank slate and not have any, anybody who's already has a lead on the competition, so to speak, in your own mind. Then it becomes a question of justifying in your mind the hire. And through the human, brain, once you make a decision, you try to justify it. So if you've already made the decision before they walk through the door, then this entire interview process is going to be a justification exercise, and that's not truly going to be reflective of who may be the best candidate from a culture standpoint.
Do you envision, going back to baseball here, do you envision both of these guys being in, I assume the answer here is yes, in the weekly meeting with whomever it is, you or Patrick, who's the sport administrator? I mean, that's a joint conversation every single week, right?
That is, yes. We're going to treat both of them as if they were the head coach. We're not going to, try to place one in a position. So it's going to be completely even-handed to the best of our ability. And, that walking in the door, I think that legitimizes both of their stations within our organization, and also has that value proposition that they're both valued. And the best employees and organizations are the ones that feel valued. And the more that we can do in terms of making sure that these two co-head coaches in this unique circumstance that we think is going to work out well feel valued through the daily grind, that's going to be to our advantage.
You know who would be interesting to interview like a year from now, and it won't be me because it doesn't fit our brand, but D1 Baseball should do it, or Baseball America should do it, is interviewing the assistant coach, whomever Colin and Jackie end up hiring, and asking that person how the dynamics have worked. That's a really interesting facet of this whole thing too.
Absolutely. We would welcome that. We run a transparent organization. Anybody who wants any information about anything we do is welcome to contact us, and we kind of operate like an open book. That's one of our hallmarks. The interesting thing I can tell you is the people that their initial response is quite interesting to me. It's so narrow in the question as, oh, you're going to hire co-head coaches in baseball. Well, who's going to make the bunt call in the 7th inning? Or who's going to talk to the pitchers in the 5th inning? They're going to work all that out. I mean, this is going to force a collaboration. In fact, I think from a game planning standpoint, rather than one person working through in terms of looking in the mirror, the two of them having conversations and having legitimate conversations where they can come to compromising is going to put us into the best strategic situation as possible. It's just interesting to me that the first response to this situation is not the questions that you've asked, which are very astute, but go right to the baseball questions as to what happens in some 4-3 game in the 7th inning when there needs to be a decision made.
Oh, I'm a baseball guy. That stuff is critically important. It just doesn't fit the D1 Ticker brand at the moment. I mean, I'm interested in all that stuff too, but again, that's not prescient for us, right now. Well, it's a fascinating experiment and/or decision, and we will definitely revisit some of these tenets that we've talked about, and I appreciate your feedback today, and good luck with it going forward.
No, we appreciate it. And again, it's not one size fits all, but in these circumstances at this university at this time during this search, this was the appropriate result from my standpoint.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.